For those of you who don't know, Randy has co-founded a number of startups. He's also worked as VP of Design for Etsy and is currently head of design for Grab. So please do ask your questions and I will be happy to facilitate. But I will kick off by asking you first, Randy, if you could give people a background on, you're from the US and New York, and then you moved to Singapore. Why Singapore? And give us a little bit more on your background.
I won't spend too much time on my background. I think you covered it, you know, on the kind of high level kind of resume sense. Maybe one important thing though is that it isn't quite covered there, but feels more sort of personal to me. And it relates to why Singapore part of your question, which is I've just always been really personally interested in things that cross disciplines. Into sort of unknown and unexpected ways, unexpected places. And I think that often the magic in any generative kind of creative experience, and also in many like life experiences, just come at the intersection of unexpected things. And you can't really plan for unexpected things, at least from my perspective. But what you can do is kind of be open to the context, right? To sort of allow yourself to encounter situations in which unexpected things may happen. Yeah. And to me, it's that intersection plus applying the skills and traits and methods of a designer or creative professional, let's say, in those situations that makes for really exciting work and hopefully really valuable contributions to other people's lives and experiences. Yeah. So why Singapore then in that context? Look, Singapore is a hub for a great amount of activity and attention that's happening in an exciting part of the world. Singapore itself is sort of a bubble in some way. It both acts as a hub and a connection point, but also as a bit of a bubble in the context of Southeast Asia, in terms of its sort of stage of economic development, and a number of other things, the development of particular industries and the absence of other industries and resources that have made Singapore a really interesting place that has invested a lot in human capital, which also has deep history in its political relationships and how it manages those, in financial services and in trade and sort of scientific innovation, right? So these are really interesting set of conditions under which to kind of spend most of your day-to-day life, I suppose. But what really brought me to Singapore was Grab and the opportunity, both sort of the professional opportunity inside Grab, but more importantly, the life experience opportunity and scale of the potential positive impact of an organization like Grab. When I met with the founders somewhere along my kind of interview journey with Grab, it became very clear to me very quickly how sincere and deeply rooted the intentions are to build a lasting business that improves the quality of life for as many people as possible in Southeast Asia. And to me, that felt like an easy mission to wake up and care about every day. And it also contained a number of unknowns to me. So that goes back to that earlier point. A bunch of giant questions, a lot of things I don't know, I'm not familiar with personally, I'm not sure how to do, don't understand the problem space. And to me, that's exciting. The work of kind of shining a light around in that dark room, and trying to reveal some understanding, while at the same time knowing that the needs of the organization as they had been presented to me and as I could see from the product experience and what I knew of the team, also built upon some experiences I'd had in the past and things that I've either built a track record doing well or have, failed out enough times to know some of the pitfalls to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And Grab fascinates a lot of people because it's a huge company. It's everywhere. And there is several products and facets, but I guess it's at the same time, it's so young. At what level of maturity would you say that it's at in terms of both teams, product, and services?
Yeah, great question. And one actually that is both the sort of some of the strengths and challenges we even work with internally when we think about, one, building and growing the business, to serve our customers, and also just developing the teams. So the way I'd orient you to this is to say, think about Grab, the company, right, of the business, as really a portfolio, right? Now, it's a portfolio of product experiences and business opportunities that are targeted at particular needs and challenges that have been, observed or revealed in the customer's experiences. And if you hold that idea of it being, a portfolio in some way, or just that it's a kind of an ecosystem of many things, even internally, different parts of the company and different parts of the product are at very different stages of development. So there are parts of the business that, many people who might be already familiar with Grab or live or work in the region would have seen from day one, where we were a point-to-point sort of transportation and logistics company, right? Allowing you to get a ride from A to B safely and easily, which is still an important part of our business, but is one of many, many things we do. But you might imagine that we have the longest time working on that problem, right? Both developing the organization around it, the processes, the methods, the underlying technology. And so in many ways, one might say that's, the most mature part of the organization, which is true until you back up and say, like, actually the entire company is 8.5, 9 years old, which depending on your scale is, ancient or nascent, right? But overall, it's still a relatively young company at the grand scheme of companies, especially one with a footprint of the number of things that we do and the size and scale of influence in an organization. It's pretty young, yeah. But you imagine now that's the most mature part of the organization and the product. And so around that, we've developed a number of other things over time, some that explicitly leverage on the strengths of that part of the business. So we think about maybe our logistics, intelligence in a way, about what is the right way to send, person or thing from A to B or A to B to C, while maximizing the earning potential of our driver partners or the restaurants that we serve, and simultaneously delivering good value to the customers. There's a lot of data understanding there, as well as user behavior shaping things that manifest themselves through design that are, we can sort of build on what we've learned there. Yeah. And there are other parts of the business that are, of course, we try to extend what we learned, but are very different beasts to tackle. For example, over the last few years, we've launched a whole suite of financial services. Initially a digital wallet experience that has a direct connection really to transportation and food originally, although now you can, of course, pay in person, a number of other things like you'd expect with digital wallet, peer-to-peer transfer payments and things. But around that, we've launched, savings, investing, lending, and insurance products, and the consumer psychology, the market need, the behavior shaping and education needed to serve customers. Sort of, let's pick insurance as an example. Insurance needs are very different from I want to have my lunch soon, and I want it to be, fast, healthy, and affordable. Lunch is very different than I'd like to ensure my, physical safety or some other thing, in the context of, say, a global pandemic, right? So very, very different parts of the business and customer needs we're serving that are just almost radically different in their both depth internally, right? So they're very emergent. It's almost like a new innovation from inside the organization. How do you operate that and give it its space to thrive and judge its success differently than maybe something that's been established for a long time? While at the same time, navigating the fact that all of these things are one organization. So they're one company. Right? They're one brand to consumers. And they're one product experience, at least when you imagine the consumer part. Of course, we have product experiences for our driver partners and our restaurant merchants and things. But all of the things I just described to you, lives in one Android app, right? And so while the teams and the technology stacks and the approaches may be at various levels of maturity, they do all need to come together and ultimately ship into the same packaged up piece of software that lives in people's smartphones. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I want to move on to Teams in a second. I'll just pause because Anya, who's listening in, has asked a question, which I think is very interesting. It's around, you've talked about all the different products that you're in, but that in turn leads to different geographies. How often do you look at each geography separately?
Yeah, interesting question. So I think, within our geography, I mean, Grab is sort of, I would say, aggressively focused on Southeast Asia, right? So we don't look outside of the region in terms of, the customers we serve. Of course, we look at what is happening globally in a number of areas to, learn from best practices, try to learn from other people's successes and failures and things like that. But within the region that we focus on, our organization has essentially country and market focused teams. And I think it actually comes back to one of the strengths of the organization from its earlier days. The early experiences and services that we started offering at the beginning had to do with on the ground transportation. It was a very online to offline experience. And there's no way to create that business without having a presence on the ground, having a team on the ground, meeting, and onboarding driver partners in person and things like that. And so from the various early DNA of the organization, there are country teams, city teams across the region that are the eyes and ears in part, right? In addition to doing sort of the local and regional like business operations, they're very close to the customer's experiences on the ground, and they're a primary communication avenue back to us, right? So one version of answering your question is all the time, right? And maybe one of the challenges actually that we have so much information across all these different markets that one of the challenges is to how to kind of parse and prioritize within it. So we take great pride in having like very local understanding, even at the city level. Let's take, an example of maybe like a third tier city in Indonesia. We just treat very differently than Jakarta. You just have to. There's not really an option to not, if you want to get any traction. And yet at the same time, you can't. Oh, go ahead, please.
Randy, do you apply it to different cities? So if it was Malaysia or somewhere or Singapore, would you apply that learning to different cities for
yes.
design?
And so that's one of the really interesting things is you need to take this intensely local consideration because otherwise if we kind of assume it's generally the same, we won't discover important nuances. But also what you'll find sometimes is maybe you'll discover a nuance or some customer innovation or some customer problem. And even though you're not seeing data of it in other places in the same way, either it's not happening yet, or maybe it's just not making its way through the feedback channels, which while there are many, are imperfect. The solution or the way you address that problem may actually be applicable or may address challenges or opportunities more broadly, right? So it's really like ears on the ground truth understanding, but then not trying to solve every tiny problem or opportunity we discover, but to try to kind of recognize patterns across those things and find shared solutions, because that's part of what you get, the advantages of being at scale. Some of the advantages that software, allows you to have is to look for those common answers. And it is a mix. It's straight up a mix. And so this comes back to kind of navigating the ambiguity in things. We decide for it to be a mix. Customers' lives are a mix. And also things like, let's take our financial services. Regulatory considerations just exist at the country level. Like they just do. There's no, if you want to do that business, you have to accept that, right? You can't apply the same approach in each market.
That's a very valid point. And it's an interesting way even to be able to divide out. I guess the other thing is we talked about the company Grab, but in general, with regards to the team, a lot of the companies, so Etsy and Grab, huge scaling companies in a high growth and a high growth kind of area. What's the biggest lessons you've had over the years when building your design teams within both of those companies?
Oh goodness. I mean, that itself is probably its own conversation. Well, I think that building teams, from my perspective, is really it's a long game. It's a slow burn process that also comes with, I think, well, for one, maybe peaks and valleys, but I was going to say sort of plateaus along the way, meaning that the sense of progress, both for at an individual level, maybe inside my own heart and mind, but also for the organization and for the team, and where they start to see benefits or not of some of the work, really varies. And so it's pretty rare that it's kind of like, let's build this team, zoop, everything's great. It just doesn't work that way, because team building is a people problem, and people are, complex and individual, nuanced. And I would say one of the lessons to me that has been most helpful is looking at strengths inside the organization already, meaning functional strengths, maybe areas adjacent to or that partner with design regularly, and how can we sort of leverage those strengths as we help build the team. I'll give you maybe a quick concrete example of that. In my time at Etsy, despite what maybe people might think of this kind of very handcraft centric e-commerce marketplace, the greatest strength organizationally inside that company is its engineering team. Very, very strong and capable engineering team, in a way that I think surprised many people. And one of the things we did then was really align design very closely with engineering. In a bunch of ways. Organizationally, like, let's divide the team and structure it in like a parallel model. Let's pair leaders and partners at similar levels, and scopes of responsibility to partner on things together. We use some of the same vocabulary and terminology as we kind of developed our processes and communicated with them around the organization, so that we weren't running around kind of saying, hey, design does this and works this way. It's kind of like, hey, this thing you already know and trust, now it's also design, which is, I think, is a particular approach. For me, I tend to like to surf the waves rather than, maybe have the assumption that we can change the tides of the ocean. It's like, okay, the waves are coming, now let's like prepare ourselves. And so looking for what exists and the right things to integrate with to help enable faster growth and progress was a really important lesson I had sort of learned through that experience. Applying that in the context of Grab, I think it's actually very different. Not to say that our engineering team isn't great. It is. It's actually really impressive in a bunch of ways. But when I looked at where the opportunities were for design, a lot of it looked like the throughput to begin with. The organization really, like the speed of execution, the organization values and prides in and of itself, and I think appropriately so, in many ways, because that's what has allowed it to be so successful on the ground in so many markets so quickly. And that was something we looked at and said, hey, what of those attributes can we kind of take or emphasize in the design organization early in this journey? And what does the team need to kind of be like to be able to do that? To kind of align with the natural, maybe I'll even say biases or something, right? Internally in the organization, like what do we value? It's like, okay, let's align with what we value and begin momentum there. And then from that momentum, build in other things that we believe are important or necessary, whether it's investing in different parts of the process or different functions or other kind of integrations with other teams.
I really like
and so
that.
Similar lesson, different application. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then, so you talked about successes. I'll move on to the obvious, which would be failures and challenges that you've encountered. Firstly, failure is a very, very broad term. What's failure mean to you, or how do you define it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. I think like the sort of dictionary definition in a way, or one that I relate to and hold in my mind all the time, is that like failure is a lack of success. Right? And I think that's actually quite simple and it's helpful for me. I don't mean failure in the sense that the system collapses or something like that. When we talk about, like a banking system failure, we kind of mean that like, the financial institutions are, no longer safe or things like that. And I don't mean that kind of failure. I mean the lack of having yet achieved the success we intend to achieve. Yeah. At a very personal level, I think it comes right to the roots of I was going to say my design training, but maybe even just like creative work at all. It's probably when I, tried to write bad songs on my guitar when I was 14 years old, is that most of the time I'm wrong.
You mean last week?
Yeah, well, there's that too. Yeah. Most of the time I'm wrong, and most of the time it's not very good. And I mean that not in some like self-pity way or anything, but just to try to like see the world as it is. And so if I believe that to be true and kind of accept it as true, those are the conditions of failure in a way. Right? And so then I think, if that's true, so what, right? And so it says, how do we, one, get comfortable with that feeling personally, and how do we make that okay in an environment or a culture? But then also, what do we do to take best advantage of the wins when they do happen, right? How do we ensure that within this world of like sort of mostly being wrong, how do we get right at the right times? How do we know that being right in this moment is a kind of like maybe a, how do we say, strike while the iron's hot moment, I think this is like a sensibility that maybe you build up over time, or some intuition, and also sometimes just a comfort with like risk taking, to say like, this may be another one of those we don't know, but the only way we're going to find out is if we lean in much harder and try to make it be so, And so that's how I think about failure. I actually think about it as like the normal state.
Yeah, and so many, when just as you're talking, so many engineering and product teams and design teams are programmed to think, let's experiment, let's fail. It's a positive thing, even though it's a negative thing. It's really nice the way you framed it and put it into context of know when you can celebrate the wins too. And then going on to innovation. As well, which leads from failures and experimentation in when you are driving high growth initiatives. How would you deal with the individuals that sometimes might block? There's a lot of people that aren't working in companies or teams that are autonomous and that they're all aligned. How do you work with people who inevitably will block your drive and your goals?
Yeah, great question. I think that a few quick things. One maybe points to my personal mindset around this, but then also maybe some methods or techniques. I just choose to come from a place of assuming good intent, in every case. So I reject the idea that there are people who try to stand in the way of things. Now, maybe that's true and I'm just naive, but I think that more often than not, they don't realize they're standing in the way of things because their perspective is different, or their priorities, what they're focused on, are different. So they may not see that, or they're, to accept the responsibility ourselves too, as, designers and UX leaders and otherwise. Maybe we haven't done a good job of helping them be aware of those things. Yeah. So that's one, right? To say, oh, they're standing in the way. It's like, are they standing in the way because they actively built a roadblock, or are they standing in the way because they happen to be standing where they were and we haven't said, hey, excuse me, could you step over? Or excuse me, do you want to walk on this journey together? I think we can be helpful to each other. Right? Mm. So I tend to just take an optimistic view of that and assume good intentions. Right?
Yeah, so look at it from their perspective.
Exactly. And I think these are the two key things then. One, I'll go back to this kind of surf the waves metaphor. I actually try to identify where there's the lowest friction early in what we're trying to make happen. That may be, is that in this part of the team? Is that with this partner? Is that with this business? Let's say we're trying to make some transformation across multiple parts of the business. Maybe an example is some just improved user experience that cuts across many teams. Yeah. We can have a master plan, sort of a map of how we'd improve that across all these things. I'm always inclined to try to help the team identify areas where we can start to get the momentum as early as possible with the least friction. And that kind of avoids at first, right, this idea of maybe there's something blocking in the way. It's like, okay, here's within our direct control, what can we do to start to make progress? It's even good just for the team to feel like progress is coming. because maybe you need to build up some of that positive energy to apply it towards some of the more challenging problems that are just around the corner. So like, how can we keep the thing small enough to get momentum? And then where are the partners or stakeholders that we believe have sort of the lowest effort in order to create that next kind of change, right? So rather than going straight to maybe what we believe is the most challenging, maybe block or friction, is there a similar one that we're also going to need to overcome, but that is easier? And can we overcome that one and use the improvement we made there as evidence for why and how we can be helpful or overcome the challenge, the next one, So it's very much kind of like building blocks. And then the other is exactly what you pointed. When you said look at it from their perspective, I just try to, as much as possible, simply frame things for other people in the way that it aligns with what they're already trying to accomplish or how it will benefit what they're trying to achieve. That I think, there's maybe art and science, to this. But I don't mean in like these super compelling cases with like tons of data to, sometimes you need that. But what I really mean is to say, hey, look, I understand that your motivation here is to try to grow this part of the business, or you've got this metric, you've seen challenge moving. Like, here's this initiative we're trying to make happen. And I'd like to work with you, or I'd like for our team to be able to work with your team to see if in this thing we're trying to make happen, we can unlock opportunities for that thing you're trying to make happen. And really focus it there. It's not about change your entire worldview or new mental model. It's like, can you allow us to help you through the thing that we're trying to do?
Yeah, I think what you're saying as well in every aspect is focus on the easiest way to win and to succeed, the easiest and quickest. Stop making life harder for yourself in every way.
It's true. I think one of the challenges I'll mention is one of the challenges with this approach, I continue with it, but it comes in that, failures bucket, is that very often
if you're trying to make it positive.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Very often if you're trying to make progress against large initiatives, which change in a complex organization or improving a complex product experience is in and of itself a large initiative. The early things you do and those small wins can be really powerful to the people close to it, and that's great. But you may work on that for a while and it still kind of feels like zero progress in the context of the larger thing. And the willingness to kind of continue to push through, the sort of faith and grit in a way that the continued effort will start to create the fruits later is totally necessary, because at the end of the day, you can project and describe how it'll be better in the future. But for many, many people, they just won't really understand it until they experience it themselves.
Yeah, that's very true. And sticking on just teams around, so you worked building teams from scratch, and you've gone into pre-existing teams. What are the main differences or even similarities between those two types of team buildings? Which is more difficult?
I think that for me, my experience is that stepping into existing teams is more difficult. But that's based on, while I do have several experiences to inform this opinion, it's still a limited number. It's a very limited number in the grand scheme
for anyone in the world.
Yeah. So I'm sure that, many people who are part of the, conference have had their own versions of these and may take away similar lessons or the exact opposite, conclusion. But for me, I think that building was easier. And I'll explain why. One, I think this is the experience I had first, in a way. It related to a lot of my earlier professional and life experiences. I used to be the front person of a rock band where I organized the people and wrote the music and whatever. So it was very much like leading this initiative with people I'd put together in sort of my vision, right? And you fast forward through time, the experience I had at Etsy was very similar. I came in as myself and one other designer in an organization of about 60 people at that time, 60. And over 8 years, we grew this. The company's about 1,200 people when I left, and the design organization was maybe 10 or 12% of that. And every incremental change along the way, all the lessons learned, all the things that contributed to what it was, 8 years later, was something I was actively a part of, observed, got to, drive, be responsible for the decision of, for better or worse, but also learn the direct experience from and use that to calibrate things over time. And when you step into an organization or a team that already exists, many of those same kinds of lessons have been learned. Many people have made decisions like that before you, but you don't have the experience of them firsthand. And you haven't been able to stack them up in small bits over time, which is way easier to process, than stepping into this thing, this like sort of swirling, moving, organic thing that is on some trajectory of its own, and you kind of meet it somewhere along the way and enter the stream. And so
how have you managed to get that? Sorry for interrupting. How have you managed to achieve then that same beauty of building a team in a pre-existing team?
Yeah. Well, I would say one condition that is helpful is to join a team when it already has the sort of remit, the resources, and the need to grow, right? Because that, like those growth moments and those changes, you start to be able to make some of those kinds of choices and learn from the choices you make, involve other people in the choices, which also helps you learn about the team and the culture. And, each time someone comes or goes from a team or you reconfigure it, you're kind of shaping the culture in these micro ways. So the fact that change is needed and there's the context for change is really helpful. I think more so than something being maybe static. So I've kind of had that experience too. Join a team that is roughly, it's kind of like, here's the team. It's going to stay about the same size. It's going to do about the same things. And I found that difficult in hindsight because the built-in like natural change moments aren't there, in that kind of set of expectations. The other though, and it goes back to a couple of these same principles, was to really try to identify people into areas where it felt like that learning about the organization and some early choices and change that could be made were close and familiar and we could establish trust early, so really like partners in and around the team who could kind of act as the anthropologist for the team or the historian for the team and help me understand the context I was operating in. And then some other people who I could establish trust with who I think understood the context and said, yeah, this is going to be hard. We understand you're going to need to change some things. And so as I maybe made some choices, including choices that, maybe aren't obvious at first or don't go well at first, they still kind of have your back. They understand that's the first step of a long journey, which may have some, ups and downs along the way.
Yeah, it sounds like your positivity has actually resonated. It really does help you in all of the roles that you've taken on. We're running out of time, and I want to ask you a slightly controversial question. You are imported talent to Singapore, which is becoming an increasing factor in Asia. And Ashwin talked about him having the dream of going to the US, and people dream of that. Is it a case of West is best, or what's the deal with talent in Asia? What is your opinion on that?
Oh yeah, interesting. Well, I would say I can speak to this only from my perspective, and I'm no expert on talent in Asia. I don't think it's a West is best thing, at least on the ground, right? So I back up for a second. We talked about Singapore and its investment in people as a natural resource in a way, right? And its population. For many, a decades long strategic choices from the government to embrace foreign talent in a number of sectors, and they've evolved what they view as those sectors over time in order to bring in outside perspective, bring in people with experience in areas, and to build and create teams, teach people, become part of the professional community, become part of the academic community, et cetera, in order to build the talent and capabilities as part of their national policy, right? About a long-term plan. And so there's something very intentional there about that kind of talent and experience exchange. And talking with people in Singapore and understanding people who have experienced that in a number of ways, I think that it's valued and respected in many cases, and other times they're like, it's not as effective, for me or in my situation as I would have expected. So a variety of things like you'd expect, I think, from any big policy. And so that's an important context because I'm kind of part of that story too. But the other story I'd say I'm a part of is simply one where the kinds of organizations I've been a part of, the teams I've built, the experiences I have are from a geography where the industry has just been happening for longer, right? And so there's just some more time to accumulate some of those experiences in part, right? More permutations of the cycle in a way. And you can't really recreate that without time, but that also doesn't make it somehow obviously better. It's just different. And so that's how I'll get to this other point. It can be really helpful to have that experience, but of course that experience comes from a particular context. And the context of working in Southeast Asia or serving the customers in Southeast Asia is very different. And so I see, my role or responsibility really as one of foundation building in partnership with the people on our teams, the professional community, both in Singapore and across the region. Because my hope and dream is that, Grab, given its scale, its brand visibility, its influence, becomes a really positive contributor in this professional space from a design, user experience, customer experience standpoint. And what we can do to help cultivate and elevate and amplify already great things happening in the region from a talent standpoint, I think is something we can and should do. So I see us as a vehicle for that, and myself as a facilitator of that vehicle. I'd be really proud if we could look back and see that has happened, not because imported talent from the West made Grab design better or something like that, but because Grab design is exceptional in the context of Southeast Asia and has a global reputation because the team made it so, and that team did it in large part by cultivating and growing talent locally and within the region. Yeah.
Which I really like. Yeah, I think it's the one thing that I'm looking forward, even with UXDX, is we've the beauty of now being obviously in Europe originally and now all over the world. And what we're seeing from talking with all the teams there in Asia, it's phenomenal. And I actually think there's a lot of learning that Silicon Valley can take from it. It's a whole different world, and it's a huge and exciting time to be in it, and it's only getting bigger. Which is, absolutely, I'm assuming is my final note, is why you took your life opportunity, as you've called it before, which is a very brave move to make. And you talked about career opportunities, but also weighing it up as a life opportunity and moving there. I believe Singapore it's good in that context for you.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think about this really as collecting experiences that make for an interesting life, and myself, like personally, my intrinsic motivation there, and to do so in a way that, in the daily choices we make and the actions we have, we believe will leave things better than we found it. That the contribution to the business, the contribution to the people inside, the teams and the individuals, to the professional community, and most importantly, to the customers of the region, which is why I would choose an organization like Grab to spend my time with. That those, just what a great way to spend your time, to have the opportunity and potential to serve so many people in ways that can improve their quality of life, after you've done your work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think on a nice ending note, leave things better than you found them is a really nice summary for everything. And I think it's something we should all strive for in general in life. Randy, I could talk to you for a day and a week. You're amazing. Thank you, and I know that everyone will have got so much value from your time. And enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you again. And thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.